His billionaire mother tried to destroy his marriage, so the black wife destroyed her legacy. The scent of jasmine and betrayal hung heavy in the conservatory as Gisette pressed her ear to the mahogany door. Inside, Hillary Wellington's voice dripped with venom as she spoke into her phone. "The private investigator found everything we need," Hillary was saying. Her father's bankruptcy, her mother's arrest record, even that little incident from college. Charles will see exactly what kind of family he married into. Gisette's breath caught in her throat. 3 months of marriage, and her mother-in-law was still hunting for ammunition to destroy her. The crystal chandelier above cast fractured light across the Persian rug as she steadied herself against the doorframe, her wedding ring catching the glow. "By tomorrow evening, my son will realize his mistake," Hillary continued, her laugh sharp as broken glass. "And that little gold digger will be signing divorce papers by Christmas." Heat bloomed across Gisette's dark skin, not embarrassment, but fury. She'd built her own marketing empire from nothing, spoke 3 languages, held an MBA from Wharton. Yet to Hillary Wellington, she would always be that girl who'd trapped her precious son. Through the crack in the door, Gisette watched her mother-in-law pace beside towering orchids, her platinum hair gleaming like armor. The same woman who smiled sweetly at charity galas while plotting in shadows. Gisette's fingers tightened around her phone. She had a choice: run to Charles and beg him to defend her again, or finally fight back with the ammunition she'd been gathering for weeks. Hillary's company books, her discriminatory hiring practices, the bribes, the tax evasions, all waiting in Gisette's encrypted files like sleeping dragons. Would destroying Hillary Wellington make her just as ruthless, or would it finally set her marriage free? Gisette slipped away from the conservatory, her heart hammering as she climbed the spiral staircase to the guest wing. The Wellington estate felt like a museum, all marble columns and oil paintings of dead patriarchs, each room designed to remind her she didn't belong. But she'd survived worse than snobbery. Growing up in Detroit, she'd watched her mother work 3 jobs while her father battled addiction. Every scholarship, every late-night studying, every networking event where she was the only black face in the room, it had all led to building Phoenix marketing from a cramped apartment into a 7-figure agency. Then she'd met Charles at a tech conference in San Francisco. He'd been standing alone at the cocktail reception, his tie loosened, looking as out of place among the startup crowd as she felt at Wellington family dinners. When he'd approached her booth and genuinely listened to her presentation on multicultural marketing, something had sparked. Not his family name or fortune. She hadn't known about that until their 3rd date, but his quiet intelligence, his dry humor, the way he saw her mind first. "You're brilliant," he'd whispered that first night they'd made love, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "My mother's going to hate that about you." He'd been joking then. Neither of them had anticipated Hillary's surgical precision in dismantling what threatened her control. Now, in the guest bedroom that felt more like exile, Gisette opened her laptop. Her best friend and business partner, Angela, had been forwarding intelligence for weeks. Financial discrepancies at Wellington Industries, testimonies from former employees, documentation of Hillary's systematic exclusion of minority-owned vendors. Charles appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled from running frustrated hands through it. At 32, he carried the weight of being heir to an empire he'd never wanted. His photography, landscapes that captured raw emotion in dying light, sat gathering dust while he managed board meetings and quarterly reports. "She's planning something," he said, collapsing into the armchair. "I can feel it." Gisette's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could show him everything, the evidence that would shatter his last illusions about his mother. Or she could protect him from the truth that would devastate him. "Maybe it's time I planned something too," she said quietly. Charles studied her face, recognizing the steel that had attracted him from the beginning. "What are you thinking?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Love or war? Protection or justice? She chose both. The confrontation came at Sunday brunch, served on bone china that had belonged to Wellington wives for 5 generations. Hillary sat at the head of the mahogany table like a queen holding court, her smile razor-sharp as she slid the manila envelope across polished wood. "I thought you might want to see these before Charles does," Hillary said, her voice honeysweet with poison. Gisette's hands remained steady as she opened the envelope. Photographs spilled out, her father's mugshot from his DUI arrest, her mother's eviction notice, a blurry image of Gisette at 19, tears streaming down her face outside a college disciplinary hearing. The shoplifting charge was expunged, of course, Hillary continued, buttering her croissant with deliberate precision. But the court records still exist. Funny how desperation makes people do such revealing things. The memory hit Gisette like ice water. 19, broke, trying to steal textbooks she couldn't afford because her scholarship didn't cover everything. The security guard who'd caught her had been kind, the dean understanding, but the shame had followed her for years. "What do you want?" Gisette asked, her voice level despite the rage building in her chest. $5 million. A signed confession that you married Charles for money. And your complete disappearance from our lives. Hillary's gray eyes, so much like Charles's, held no warmth. "Or these photos get delivered to my son, along with a detailed report about your family's colorful history." Charles chose that moment to walk in, his face bright with the morning run that had become his escape from family tension. He stopped short, sensing the electricity in the air. "What's going on?" Hillary's smile widened. "Just having a little chat with your wife about family values." Gisette looked at Charles, his rumpled hair, his questioning eyes, the way he instinctively stepped closer to her when he sensed danger. 3 months of marriage, and he'd fought for her against every snide comment, every calculated slight, every attempt to make her feel small. Now it was her turn to fight. "Actually," Gisette said, sliding the photographs back into the envelope, "I think it's time Charles learned about everyone's family values." She pulled out her phone and opened the files Angela had been compiling. Hillary's face went white as spreadsheets filled the screen. Phantom contracts, discriminatory hiring practices, tax shelters that skirted the edge of legality. "What would you have done in their place?" Gisette asked, her voice carrying the quiet strength that had built her empire. The battle lines were finally drawn. The war began in whispers and escalated to boardroom battles. Over the next 6 weeks, Gisette felt like she was living 2 lives, devoted wife by night, strategic warrior by day. Charles tried to bridge the widening chasm between the women he loved, but each peace offering fell flat. Hillary escalated her attacks, freezing Gisette out of family events and spreading subtle poison among the Wellington social circle. Gisette responded by quietly documenting every slight, every racist comment Hillary thought went unnoticed. "She called your marketing firm Urban Consulting at the museum gala," Angela reported over coffee, her laptop open to social media screenshots. "3 different people heard her tell the ASDers that you were, and I quote, exactly what you'd expect Charles to rebel with." Gisette's jaw tightened. She'd spent that evening watching Charles navigate between his mother's icy disapproval and her own growing fury. He'd held her hand through dinner, whispered reassurances, but she could see the exhaustion wearing on him. At home, their intimacy became a refuge from the battlefield. Charles would find her in his home office, surrounded by financial documents and laptop screens, and pull her into his arms with desperate intensity. "I never wanted this life," he murmured against her neck one night, his hands tracing the curve of her spine. "The company, the expectations, the constant performance. You make me feel real." Gisette held him close, breathing in his scent of cedar and determination. She was falling deeper in love with him even as she planned his mother's destruction. The contradiction should have felt wrong, but it felt necessary, protecting what they'd built by dismantling what threatened it. "She offered me money to leave," Gisette confessed against his shoulder. Charles went still. "How much?" "Does it matter?" He pulled back to look at her, storm-gray eyes searching her face. "It matters that she tried to buy you. It matters that she thinks everything has a price. Even love. Especially love." They made love that night with an urgency that felt like claiming territory, each touch a promise, each kiss a declaration of war against anyone who would separate them. But afterward, lying in the darkness, Gisette wondered if Charles would still choose her when he learned the full truth about what she was capable of. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Hillary had moved beyond character assassination to corporate warfare, using her influence to cost Gisette 3 major clients. The message was clear: submit, or watch your own empire crumble. Gisette stared at the termination emails on her phone and made her choice. "Will they or won't they survive this?" she whispered to her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Then she opened her secure drive and began uploading files to a journalist's encrypted inbox. The New York Times article dropped on a Tuesday morning like a bomb in the financial district. Wellington Industries under federal investigation for discriminatory practices and tax evasion. The byline belonged to Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter known for bringing down corrupt executives. Gisette sat in her Madison Avenue office, watching the story spread across social media like wildfire. Her hands shook slightly as she scrolled through the quotes from former Wellington employees. Stories of qualified minorities passed over for promotions, of contracts steered away from black-owned businesses, of Hillary's whispered instructions to maintain company culture. Her phone buzzed. "Charles, did you do this?" The question hung in the digital space between them. Gisette closed her eyes, hearing the bewilderment in those 4 words. Not anger yet, just shock that his wife might be capable of such calculated destruction. "We need to talk," she texted back. They met at Central Park, away from the Wellington estate's listening ears and watching eyes. Charles sat on their favorite bench by the reservoir, his usual composure fractured. He looked older somehow, as if the morning had aged him years. The reporter quoted specific internal documents, he said without preamble. Financial records that only family members should have access to. Board meeting transcripts from discussions you weren't present for. Gisette sat beside him, close enough to touch but feeling the distance growing between them. "Your mother tried to destroy me, Charles. Not just embarrass me or freeze me out, actually destroy my business, my reputation, everything I've built. So you destroyed hers first." The accusation stung because it was true, and because she could see the man she loved grappling with who she really was, not just the brilliant woman he'd married, but someone willing to wage war when backed into a corner. "I protected us," she said quietly. "I protected our marriage and our future. Hillary wasn't going to stop until one of us was eliminated from your life." Charles ran his hands through his hair, the gesture she'd grown to love now heavy with betrayal. "She's still my mother. And I'm your wife." They sat in silence, watching joggers circle the reservoir. The October wind carried the scent of dying leaves and change. Somewhere in Manhattan, Hillary Wellington was fielding calls from lawyers, board members, and federal investigators. Somewhere else, Gisette's marriage was hanging in the balance. "She called me the night before our wedding," Charles said suddenly. "Offered to double my trust fund if I called it off. Said you'd never truly love me, that women like you only saw dollar signs when they looked at men like me." Gisette turned to study his profile, the strong jaw she'd traced with her fingers countless times. "You never told me that. Because I knew it would hurt you. And because—" He met her eyes. "Because some part of me wondered if she was right. Not about the money. I saw how you looked at me before you knew about the family fortune. But about whether someone like you could really choose someone like me." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. All this time, she'd been fighting Hillary's perception of her as a gold digger, while Charles had been fighting his own insecurities about worthiness. "Charles." She reached for his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. "I fell in love with a man who took pictures of abandoned buildings and found beauty in broken things. Who talked to me about ideas instead of asking about my dress size. Who saw my mind before my body and my dreams before my bank account. Even knowing what it would cost you. The family drama, the social scrutiny, the constant battle." Gisette thought about that first night they'd made love, how safe she'd felt in his arms despite the storm she knew was coming. How right it had felt to wake up beside him, to plan a future together, to fight for something worth protecting. "Especially knowing what it would cost," she said. "Love without sacrifice isn't love, it's convenience." They sat together as the sun shifted through autumn clouds, both understanding that their marriage had just entered new territory. The question was whether they could navigate it together or if Hillary's poison would finally find its mark. "What happens now?" Charles asked. Gisette squeezed his hand. "Now we find out if love is stronger than legacy." The FBI raid on Wellington Industries came 3 weeks later, just as winter painted Manhattan in shades of gray and betrayal. Gisette watched the news coverage from her office, her stomach churning as federal agents carried boxes of documents from the gleaming corporate tower that had been Hillary's kingdom for 30 years. Charles hadn't spoken to her in 5 days. He'd moved out of their penthouse and back to the family estate, claiming he needed space to think. But Gisette knew the truth. Hillary's final masterstroke had been painting herself as the victim of her daughter-in-law's vindictive ambition. The grieving mother, betrayed by the woman she'd tried so hard to accept. "She's good," Angela admitted over takeout Chinese food in Gisette's empty apartment. "Playing the wounded matriarch while you look like the calculating outsider who destroyed a family legacy." Gisette pushed low mine around her plate, her appetite gone. Outside, snow fell on the city like tears. "Have you seen the headlines? Gold diggers' revenge and when wives attack. They are making me into the villain." "Because a powerful black woman who fights back is always the villain," Angela said sharply. "Even when she's right. Especially when she's right." The worst part was the silence from Charles. No returned calls, no text messages, No sign that he remembered the promises they'd made in the darkness of their bedroom. Hillary had finally found the wedge she needed, making him choose between the woman who'd given him life and the woman who'd given him love. Josette's phone buzzed. Not Charles, she'd stopped hoping, but her lawyer. "The SEC wants to interview you," David Martinez said without preamble. "About how you obtained confidential Wellington Industries documents. Hillary's legal team is claiming corporate espionage." "I never accessed anything illegally," Josette protested, though her heart sank. She'd been careful, using only information provided by whistleblowers and former employees. But intention mattered less than perception in the court of public opinion. "Can you prove that? Because if they charge you, this becomes a criminal matter. Your business, your freedom, everything could be at risk." After hanging up, Josette sat in her apartment's gathering darkness, surrounded by the life she'd built with Charles. Their books mingled on shelves, his photography equipment in the corner next to her yoga mat, their wedding photo on the mantel, all evidence of a love that felt increasingly like something she'd imagined. The knock at her door came at midnight. For one desperate moment, she thought it might be Charles, finally ready to talk. Instead, she found Hillary Wellington standing in the hallway, elegant even in her legal troubles, her gray eyes cold as winter. "May I come in?" Josette stepped aside, too emotionally exhausted to fight. Hillary entered like she owned the space, examining the apartment with the calculating gaze she usually reserved for business acquisitions. "Nice place," Hillary said. "Modest, but tasteful. Very appropriate. What do you want?" Hillary turned from her inspection of Charles's photograph on the piano. "My son is destroyed. You realize that, don't you? The company his grandfather built, his father expanded, the legacy he was born to inherit, you've poisoned all of it." "Your company was built on discrimination and corruption," Josette said, finding her spine. "I just exposed what already existed. And in doing so, you've broken the man you claim to love." Hillary's voice carried the satisfaction of someone delivering a final blow. "He came to me tonight. Asked me to choose, rebuild the company or accept his marriage. Do you know what I told him?" Josette's heart stopped. "I told him that a mother's love is unconditional, but it's not unlimited. That if he chose you, he'd be choosing to destroy everything his family has built for generations. That some betrayals can't be forgiven." "You're lying." Hillary's smile was razor-sharp. "Am I? Check your phone." With trembling fingers, Josette opened her messages. There it was, a text from Charles, sent an hour ago. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." The room spun. 3 months of marriage, 6 months of courtship, a lifetime of dreams, all reduced to 7 words that felt like dying. "He's filed for divorce," Hillary continued conversationally, citing irreconcilable differences. "My lawyers have been very thorough. You'll get nothing from the Wellington family. No alimony, no property settlement. Just the satisfaction of having brought down an empire." Josette sank onto the sofa, her legs unable to support her. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd sacrificed, had led to this moment, alone in her apartment while the man she loved chose his mother's legacy over their future. Was it worth it? Hillary asked. "Your little revenge plot." For the first time since the war began, Josette had no answer. She'd won every battle and lost everything that mattered. The letter arrived on Christmas Eve, delivered by hand to Josette's apartment door. She'd been packing, preparing to return to Detroit for a holiday she dreaded spending alone, when the envelope slid beneath her door like a ghost from her former life. Charles's handwriting on cream-colored paper that smelled faintly of his cologne. "Josette, I've been a coward. Sitting in my childhood bedroom for 3 weeks, I've had time to think about who we were before the war began, and who we became during it. You were right to fight back. You were right to refuse to be a victim of my mother's prejudice and manipulation. But I was wrong to let you fight alone. I found something you need to see. Meet me at the Met tomorrow at noon, in front of the Sargent Portrait Gallery. If you still care about us, about the truth, please come. I love you. I've never stopped loving you, even when I convinced myself that love wasn't enough. Charles." Josette read the letter 3 times before her hands stopped shaking. Outside her window, snow fell on Christmas Eve like absolution, covering the city's sins in pristine white. She'd spent weeks telling herself she was better off without the Wellington drama, that she'd reclaimed her independence and self-respect. But late at night, when the apartment felt too empty and the silence too complete, she'd remember the weight of his body beside her, the way he laughed at her terrible jokes, the dreams they'd shared in the darkness before dawn. She'd married him for love, not legacy, but somewhere in the battle, she'd forgotten the difference. The Metropolitan Museum on Christmas Day felt like a cathedral of memory and possibility. Josette found Charles exactly where he'd promised, standing before John Singer Sargent's portrait of a Victorian woman whose eyes seemed to hold secrets. He looked thinner, older, but his grey eyes still made her breath catch. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice uncertain. "I wasn't sure you would. Your letter made it sound important." He handed her a manila folder, different from the one his mother had used to try to destroy her. "I found this in my father's old files. Hillary doesn't know it exists." Inside were documents dating back 25 years, correspondence between Hillary and a private investigator, financial records, and a series of photographs that made Josette's blood run cold. "My father had an affair," Charles said quietly, "with a black woman named Diana Ross, not the singer, just someone who worked at his law firm. Hillary found out and destroyed her systematically. Cost her job, her career, her reputation. Drove her out of New York entirely." The photograph showed a young woman leaving an office building in tears, protesters outside her apartment, headlines about homewrecker and gold digger. The same language Hillary had used against Josette decades later. "She's been doing this for 25 years, Josette whispered. "Using the same playbook. There's more." Charles's voice was heavy with shame. "Diana was pregnant. My father's child. Hillary made sure she had an abortion by threatening to destroy her family too." The full horror of it hit Josette like a physical blow. Hillary hadn't just been protecting her son's marriage, she'd been reenacting her own trauma, projecting her husband's betrayal onto every black woman who entered their world. "Charles." She looked up at him, seeing new understanding in his eyes. "This means you have a sister. Or would have had one." "Had. Diana died 5 years ago. Cancer. She never married, never had other children." Hillary's revenge followed her to the grave. They stood together in the gallery's hushed silence, surrounded by portraits of people long dead, holding evidence of cruelties that echoed across generations. Josette understood now why Charles had pulled away, not just from the shock of her revelations, but from the deeper horror of discovering his family's pattern of destruction. "I let her turn me against you," he said. "Just like my father let her turn him against Diana. The same manipulation, the same guilt, the same choice between love and legacy. What changed your mind?" Charles turned to face her fully, his hands reaching for hers with desperate hope. "I realized I was becoming him, choosing comfort over courage, tradition over truth. And I realized that if I lost you, if I let Hillary win again, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been." Josette felt something breaking open in her chest, 3 weeks of ice melting under the warmth of possibility. "The divorce papers. Never filed. I lied to her, bought myself time to find the truth." His thumbs traced across her knuckles. "Josette, I'm not asking you to forgive me for being weak. I'm asking you to let me be strong now. With you. For us." Around them, museum visitors moved through galleries like ghosts of Christmas future, families and couples finding beauty in art and each other. Josette looked at the man she'd married, flawed, frightened, but finally ready to choose love over legacy. "What do you want to do with this?" she asked, indicating the folder. Charles's smile was sad but determined. "I want to finish what you started. Not for revenge, but for justice. For Diana, for you, for every woman Hillary has tried to destroy." The turning point felt like stepping off a cliff together, terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely right. "Then let's finish it," Josette said, and kissed him in front of John Singer Sargent's knowing gaze. The press conference was held on New Year's Eve, in the ballroom where Josette and Charles had been married 6 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, ending Hillary's reign in the same space where their love had been publicly declared. Charles stood behind a podium bristling with microphones, his mother's secrets laid bare in neat folders on the table beside him. Josette sat in the front row, her presence both support and statement. They'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over family peace. 25 years ago, Charles began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. "My mother, Hillary Wellington, destroyed the life and career of Diana Ross, a young attorney who worked at my father's law firm. Ms. Ross's only crime was being black and pregnant with my father's child." The room erupted in flashes and shouted questions. Charles waited for quiet, his gray eyes finding Josette's across the chaos. "The same woman who drove Diana Ross to abortion and exile recently attempted to destroy my wife's business and reputation using identical tactics. The investigation into Wellington Industries' discriminatory practices revealed a pattern spanning decades, systematic exclusion of minorities, retaliation against whistleblowers, and corporate policies designed to maintain what my mother called cultural purity. Hillary herself sat in the back of the ballroom, flanked by lawyers, her face a mask of aristocratic disdain. But Gisette could see the calculation behind her eyes, already planning her counterattack, her narrative of maternal victimization. "I stand here today not as Wellington Industries' heir," Charles continued, "but as the husband of a remarkable woman who refused to be silenced, and as the potential brother of a child who never got the chance to live because of my family's prejudice." The questions came fast and brutal. "Are you disavowing your mother? Will you be taking over the company? Is your marriage a political statement?" Charles fielded each one with the grace Gisette had fallen in love with, but she could see the cost in the tightness around his eyes. Choosing love meant losing everything else: his inheritance, his family relationships, the comfortable world he'd been born into. After the press conference, they escaped to their apartment, their sanctuary from the storm they'd unleashed. The evening news played on loop, analyzing every word, every gesture, every implication of Charles's public break with the Wellington legacy. "Any regrets?" Gisette asked, curled against his chest on their sofa. Charles was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he spoke, his voice was soft with certainty. "Only that it took me so long to choose you over her." Outside their windows, Manhattan prepared for midnight. The ball drop in Times Square, resolutions and new beginnings, the symbolic death of one year and birth of another. Gisette thought about all the things that had died in the past 6 months. Illusions, false peace, the comfortable lie that love could exist without sacrifice. "What happens now?" she asked. "To us, to the company, to your mother." "Hillary will fight," Charles said with grim certainty. "She'll claim emotional manipulation, paint herself as the victim of our conspiracy. The company will probably collapse. Too much damage to the brand, too many lawsuits from former employees. And us." He tilted her chin up, his eyes serious. "We start over. No trust fund, no corporate legacy, no family safety net. Just us and what we can build together." The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, Gisette felt something like relief. The war was over, not because they'd won, but because they'd finally chosen to fight for the same thing. "I love you," she said, the words carrying weight they hadn't held since their wedding day. "Not despite the cost, but because you were willing to pay it." They made love that night with desperate tenderness, two people clinging to each other in the aftermath of destruction. As midnight approached, they held each other close, listening to the city celebrate while their own world transformed around them. At 11:59 p.m., Hillary Wellington's text arrived. "You've destroyed everything. I hope she was worth it." At 12 a.m., Charles deleted it without responding and kissed his wife as fireworks exploded over Manhattan. "She was worth everything," he whispered against her lips, and Gisette knew their love had finally won. 6 months later, Gisette stood in the offices of Phoenix Wellington Consulting, watching Charles hang his photographs on the exposed brick walls of their shared workspace. They'd merged their talents, her marketing brilliance with his strategic vision, to build something entirely new. The company specialized in helping minority-owned businesses navigate corporate America, providing the kind of support and advocacy Gisette had never received. Their first major contract had come from a tech startup run by a young Latina who reminded Gisette of herself at 25, brilliant, ambitious, and tired of fighting for respect. "This one's my favorite," Charles said, adjusting a black and white photograph of Detroit's Renaissance, abandoned buildings being reclaimed by artists and entrepreneurs, beauty rising from decay. "Because it reminds you of us," Gisette teased. "Because it reminds me that destruction sometimes clears space for creation." The settlement from Wellington Industries' bankruptcy had been smaller than expected. Hillary's lawyers had been thorough in protecting family assets. But it had been enough for a fresh start, and more importantly, it had come with an admission of wrongdoing that vindicated every choice they'd made. Hillary herself had retreated to the Hamptons, her social circle diminished but not destroyed. The wealthy had short memories for scandal when it didn't directly affect their portfolios. She sent Christmas cards addressed only to Charles, as if Gisette had never existed. "Do you miss it?" Gisette asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. The family money, the social position, the certainty of inheriting an empire. Charles considered the question with the thoughtfulness she'd always loved. Outside their windows, Manhattan hummed with the energy of people building dreams from nothing, the sound of their city, their choice, their future. "I miss my father," he said finally. "I miss the man I thought my mother was before I learned who she really was. But the money, the expectations, the performance. He shook his head. I was never free until I gave it all up. Their first year of marriage had been a trial by fire, but they'd emerged stronger, not despite the conflict with Hillary, but because of it. Love tested by adversity had proven unbreakable. Angela knocked on their office door, her arms full of contracts and her smile bright with possibility. The Morrison Group wants to expand our consulting to include corporate diversity training. And there's a documentary crew interested in telling Diana's story. Diana Ross had become something of a posthumous symbol, the woman whose destruction had finally been exposed, whose sacrifice had meaning beyond her own pain. Her story was being taught in law schools as a case study in corporate retaliation and systemic discrimination. Any word from the Times about the follow-up article? Charles asked. Sarah Chen wants to interview you both next week. The story's being nominated for a Pulitzer. After Angela left, Josette and Charles sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the evidence of what they'd built from love and determination. The afternoon sun slanted through their windows, painting everything golden, their intertwined hands, their shared dreams, their hard-won peace. What would you have done in their place? Josette asked, echoing the question that had started their war. Charles smiled, the expression free from the shadows that had haunted him during those dark weeks apart. Exactly what we did. Fight for love, choose truth over comfort, build something worthy of the sacrifice. He reached across the desk to take her hand, his wedding ring catching the light. Tell me your favorite love story. Josette laughed, remembering the couple who'd met at a tech conference, survived a mother's hatred, and chosen each other over everything else. It's about a photographer and a marketing executive who decided their love was worth destroying an empire. How does it end? With two people who learned that the best legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you build together. Outside their window, Manhattan stretched toward the horizon, full of possibility and new beginnings. Hillary Wellington's empire had crumbled, but from its ashes, something better had grown, not just their business, but their understanding of what love really meant. It meant choosing each other, again and again, no matter the cost. It meant building a legacy of justice instead of inheriting one of prejudice. It meant understanding that sometimes you had to destroy the wrong thing to create the right one. And as Josette looked at her husband, partner, co-founder, and the man who'd chosen love over legacy, she knew their story would inspire others to believe in the power of standing up for what's right, even when it costs everything. Hit the like button if you believe in love that's worth fighting for.